Welcome to part 2. As you've probably surmised, there are a lot of different threads to Carmilla Season 2.
Duh.
Usually, reviews of this series only focus on Carmilla and Laura's romantic drama, how fun Maddie is as a villain, and maybe a nod to the Holocaust theme, but never in a critical light. I'd like to bring the critical light. And I hope to bring the first real comprehensive analysis to Carmilla Season 2. One thread that most reviews skip is about Kirsch.
Okay,
yes,
me?
Wilson.
Kirsch gets a first name in this season, Wilson, but mostly everyone ignores it and just calls him Kirsch. He grows a bit from his dude bro origins into a sympathetic himbo friend. Will was always the main bad influence, seen policing his masculinity with a bit of homophobic dialogue.
If we were to try to catch the person responsible taking the girls, would the Zetas want in on that?
You think you know who's behind it?
Oh, we totally want in. We're honor bound to pound that guy.
Dude, pound that guy, really?
And we got a sense that there was a nice guy beneath that macho exterior.
You're in my lit class. You helped me the first day with the book about the Baobab guy. And
Beowulf?
Whatever. That's why I picked you special. We can just stick around here for a bit. And seeing as you like British stuff so much, I brought stout. And some tea. And these biscuit things, which I'm pretty sure are just cookies.
He barks up the wrong tree in flirting with her, but he's designed to be sympathetic. He shows genuine distress when girls are abducted. When the dean tries to sacrifice him to Lofi, he assumes the damsel in distress role, typically given to women, and is rescued by the female protagonists in an off-screen climax for some basic feminist progressivism. Now in Season 2, he shows an increased attraction to Dani as the warrior woman.
This is gonna be awesome, D-Bear. We're gonna unite our warring bros. We'll be like Romeo and Juliet.
Do you even know how Romeo and Juliet ends?
Yeah, there's kissing.
When he hears that the Summer Society needs help with their Adonis festival, he volunteers to help in hopes of scoring points with Dani. Unfortunately, he makes the deal with Mel, who tries to murder him. They turn it into a joke, where the Summers dress him up like a stag and hunt him for sport, and he delivers a truly hilarious monologue explaining what happened with great comedic timing. Kudos to the actor. But that is a straight-up murder attempt. And that's why I consider her a villain in Season 2. Dani must protect him from Mel, armed with a bow and arrow, hunting her fellow human beings like Hannibal Lecter. The rationale Mel gives is that Kirsch is part of a rapey frat culture, and thinks killing him will strike a blow against frat misogyny in the name of feminism. While the distress Mel feels is real and is treated sympathetically, she is portrayed as an irrational villain, a feminist going too far. It showcases why the Summer Society, initially portrayed as a great female empowerment group, actually isn't a good idea and just contributes to Silas's general problems. Dani asserts that Kirsch is under her protection, which sounds like a formal Summer Society oath of some kind, but is one of the plot threads dropped after the season ended. This is likely inspired by two things.
I've seen all of Veronica Mars.
One is a plot thread in Veronica Mars Season 3, where a feminist club, the Lilith House, conspires to get a misogynistic frat disbanded by engaging in disproportionate aggression toward members of the frat. This storyline has received massive feminist criticism for reducing feminist characters to shallow stereotypes, false sexual assault allegations, and glossing over female sexual assault of male characters. Veronica is positioned as the good woman who can be described as feminist by critics, but pointedly isn't a feminist activist in the plot, who opposes the feminist club and stands up for the victimized men. Even though she can sympathize with the feminists, she knows it isn't the right way to help matters.
Nothing hurts the cause more than that. You know I'm right.
The Carmilla plot positions Mel in the part of the Lilith House and makes her both a caricature of an angry feminist and an angry black woman stereotype. The framing is more respectful than Veronica Mars, just because that was so awful, but Mel is still a shallow reduction just to give Danny an enemy that looks like her as a summer society feminist fighter. A social justice warrior, if you will, so she can effectively oppose her own problematic nature and evolve as a character. The character is only progressive in contrast to Veronica Mars. In its own context, I have to say it's pretty racist. Nicole Stamp is a good actress who puts way more effort into portraying the character as a sympathetic feminist than the part was really designed for. And she brings life to the honestly crappy role, but at the end of the day, the bad writing restricts it to an evil feminist, angry black woman, minor villain, to make Danny look good in comparison. Also, Danny doesn't really evolve, so it's kind of a waste of a new character of color. The other apparent point of inspiration is Lost Girl Season 2, Episode 2, I Fought the Fae, and the Fae won.
You know that stag hunt you were just talking about?
Yeah.
I'm the stag.
In which the Light Fae, the metaphor for the Democratic Party, as the nominal good guys who are actually in support of the authoritarian system, engage in a stag hunt to determine their new leader. The stag turns out to be a person, a woman who Bo, the leftist protagonist, helps to survive the hunt. The stag hunt is explicitly compared to indigenous ritualistic animal slaughter, here portrayed as an outrageous, brutal cruelty immoral to allow in the name of sacred ritual. I find this a short-sighted, xenophobic, and probably racist take. When we look at how this plotline was translated into Carmilla, it adds another layer of racism, in the depiction of Mel as the murderous feminist of color.
Kirsch isn't responsible for any of that. He's just a sweet, silly man-child. And he's under my protection.
Danny's apparent oath to protect Kirsch is evocative of another Lost Girl plot thread.
Or I go, she goes.
You're claiming her?
Yes.
The girl is with her.
The thing where Fae own humans as slaves, keeping them as pets or livestock. This is the manner in which Danny asserts Kirsch is under her protection. Now, at the time, there was a lot of speculation that Danny was some kind of supernatural character, something that the rest of the show would seemingly disprove. I think there is reason to speculate that Danny and the Summer Society in general were designed to be supernatural, but that this plot thread was dropped with the postseason course correction. A popular theory held that she was a werewolf, to complete the whole Twilight, Edward, and Jacob dynamic, but I like the theory that she's some kind of Amazon, like Wonder Woman, as fits into the European pagan characterization, with the stag hunt, as well as the sorority name's nod to Buffy Summers.
Yeah, okay. Maybe let's not throw ourselves at the centuries-old supernatural murder machine. But
You do it all the time.
yeah, well, I work out.
So maybe Danny was supposed to have some kind of superpower, and maybe she's claiming Kirsch as her pet, under Summer Society law, in parallel to the way Carmilla sort of has Laura as her pet, in the eyes of other vampires. The show does have its kinky side, after all.
If you can keep your little pet here from making more trouble, I'll let you keep her.
However, this is all just speculation, because the thread was dropped. Kirsch is grateful for Danny's help, and this increases his crush. He's more than willing to assume the passive role of dude in distress in his dynamic with her, when he initially presented himself as a traditional male fighter, willing to fight Carmilla to protect girls he's attracted to. Danny fought to save him in the off-screen Season 1 climax, and now she saves him from Mel on-screen. In the way that he's an incompetent, goofy wannabe warrior, at the sight of a warrior woman, there's a decent parallel to Joxer and Xena Warrior Princess,
I'm not a sidekick, I'm a hero!
who initially presents as a standard macho warrior, and eventually accepts being Xena's sidekick.
Not to ruin your big heroic entrance, Xena, but she's not the one in trouble.
You can also draw parallels to Xander's development in Buffy, starting out as having fantasies of rescuing Buffy, and growing comfortable as the one that Buffy has to rescue. But Kirsch accepts it more gracefully. His crush leads him to waffle on his loyalty to Zeta Omega Mu, and Theo tells him to accept that he doesn't have a chance with Danny because she put him in the friend zone. The concept of the friend zone was coined in an episode of Friends to describe Ross's relationship with Rachel. Rachel put Ross in the friend zone.
Now you're in the friend zone.
No. I'm not in the zone.
And now he's an obnoxious nice guy. And that's how society interpreted the friend zone, stigmatizing the concept of being friends versus having romantic potential. While the basic concept of unrequited love is legitimate, the friend zone concept turns progression from friendship to romantic relationship into a social expectation, and wanting to remain at the status of friends is turned into an insult. Kirsch, upon Theo telling him he's in the friend zone, takes it in a way appropriately respectful of Danny's wishes.
Am I in the friend zone?
Kirsch, are you seriously asking me this? Fine. Fine, if that's the only way that you can think of women, then yes, you have been friend-zoned.
Yes! I'm in the friend zone.
What?
I have made it into the friend zone.
Are you happy about this?
Of course I am. I mean, yeah, I totally want more because, you're super smart and way tough and smoking hot, but, I get it. You're just not into me that way. And, even if you don't like me the way I like you, I still think you're awesome. You're like the Joan of Arc of us. Why wouldn't it be awesome to be your friend?
And just like that, the nice guy archetype is effectively subverted, and Kirsch is redeemed from his initial characterization as this heartless dude bro.
Kirsch, that's really sweet.
Oh, I am all up in your friend zone.
Please, never say that again.
Well, maybe not entirely. I mean, it's funny, but I wish that they'd, let him just be the friend. Meanwhile, Maddie vanishing the library effectively guts JP, whose soul is still tied to the building. Speaking of dudes in distress, fortunately, Laugh has a stroke of brilliance when everyone investigates the Lustig crater and they see Will's corpse. They sneak the body back and Frankenstein JP's consciousness into Will's brain. So now JP is played by Aaron Chartrand, who does a really good job of playing JP completely differently than Will. He's a vampire, but innocent in a way other vampires aren't. He's got some predatory instincts, but is ultimately just a really sweet guy, creating a thematic contrast between him and the Dean's ilk, hinting that vampires have the potential to be good people if only they're raised right. Yeah, just so we're clear, this is a ghost boy from a sentient library turned AI turned vampire. This show gets weird sometimes. Well, the ghost library vampire boy uses his soul connection to the library to reference complicated monster law that the Silas board follows to get an edge on Maddie. Derivative of Gunn getting law school knowledge dumped in his head in season 5 of Angel. JP shares that the student body can elect a board representative to speak on their behalf. Problem is, the campus is divided. Laura wants Carmilla, the heroic vampire figure, to unite the campus and stand up to Maddie. Carmilla doesn't. She doesn't relate to the heroic vampire bullshit role, and is simply highly selfish. To be a vampire is to have freedom from all worldly obligations and be loyal only to one's vampire family. Her primary character trait is indulgence. She indulges in personal introspection, philosophy, sleeping with a bunch of hot women, eating a bunch of hot women, drinking hot chocolate, and just having a good time with her select friends throughout the centuries. She gives Laura a chance, offering her a piece of the vampire lifestyle, suggesting that they abandon the whole Silas conflict and go off and indulge in their romance, forgetting about others' pain and just having a good time. Laura enjoys the fantasy, but rejects it because she isn't that kind of selfish person. And she projects her own conception of herself onto Carmilla, saying that neither one of them could do that. But of course, Carmilla knows that she would, in someone else's heartbeat. So when Laura tries to drag her back into the spotlight as a heroic vampire to oppose Maddie, she says no. Laura can't accept Carmilla as a selfish, hedonistic vampire, so Carmilla says it's over. Carmilla dumps Laura. Cue the sad montage. This is a satire of New Moon, the second Twilight book, after Edward dumps Bella to keep her safe from his family's predatory vampire instincts. The movie has a far more serious, sad montage. For all that Carmilla makes fun of Twilight, it has a fair bit of derivation from it as a revival of the monster boyfriend romance genre. The key aspect of the genre is the idea of the monster love interest holding their predatory nature out of love. That love is the ultimate redemptive force.
The story goes, you fall in love with a monster, and then they stop being all monstery. They redeem themselves, right? The story isn't just fall in love with a monster. That'd be a stupid story. I don't want to be a part of that stupid story.
Carmilla has a more realistic take. You fall in love with a monster, you either accept that they're a monster and that you like that, or you realize that the relationship doesn't work after all, and move on. Ultimately, Laura and Carmilla figure out how to compromise between heroism and selfish indulgence, but their initial resistance to compromise means that they need to take a break and figure out who they are and where they stand. The breakup is sad, but it's mature in a way that most monster romances, like Twilight, don't represent. Through the emotional pain, I have to respect it for that. On her blog, Ellen Simpson writes, "The story that we told this season was so important to me because I think being able to show that a lesbian couple can break up because they got together too soon and are too different from each other and then find their way back to common ground is virtually unheard of in media." And yes, obviously they get back together. The show is called Carmilla after all, not Laura. Carmilla, freed from the obligation to show Laura respect, asserts her personality by resuming her obnoxious roommate routine. Now with 200% more cattiness. See, now that she's the ex, she can be obnoxious in whole new ways. Turning Laura on in exaggerated sexual displays, and waltzing with Maddie, which I'm pretty sure is code for getting back with her old girlfriend and making out on the couch. In addition to leaving used menstrual products everywhere, high Kotex product placement, and leaving shed hair in Laura's food. High literal cattiness.
Some people like cats instead of dogs. Frankly, I'd rather live with a lesbian than a cat. Unless a lesbian sheds, that I don't know.
Laura tries to divide up the room, to limited success. Evidence emerges that Maddie has decided to mistreat her slaves, and Laura finally hears about it. Laura and Danny protest, and Maddie just waits for them to tire out and moves forward anyway. I think this is an allusion to the German Revolution, in which German communists tried to take over the country from the Kaiser in the middle of World War I, but the Social Democratic Party eventually surrendered. That makes Maddie both a metaphor for Hitler and the Kaiser, before she becomes a metaphor for an oppressed Jew. Confusing.
Silas for students! 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 Silas for students!
That is really getting annoying.
She and Danny, who's now the student representative, try to exploit a loophole to get Vordenberg to take over the Reichstag. I mean the Silas Board of Governors. He must defeat Maddie in debate, and they struggle to get him in shape to do so. He's a rambler. He tells obvious lies and keeps going on in stupid fish stories, positioning himself as the hero.
Vordy, you know I lived through the stuff you're lying about, right?
Maddie indicates that their sources are wrong, that she isn't planning to abuse the student body, which she calls the livestock. This is supposed to be a sign that she's not as bad as Laura thinks, but she's still a murderous vampire who owns the student body, and we're not given any vampire kink reason to justify slavery. Meanwhile, Laura is committed to viewing her in black and white terms, and fights dirty to take her down. Perry supplies Laura with evidence that Maddie is conspiring against the other board members, an owl lady, whose form might be an allusion to the slang term owl, older, wiser lesbian. See also Ida the Owl Lady from the Owl House, and The King in Yellow, from the book of the same name by Robert W. Chambers. Laura shares these documents with the board to convince them to let Vordenberg take over and oust Maddie. I think this is an allusion to the Reichstag fire? Instead of blaming the communists, we're blaming Maddie?
The rook falls to the bishop.
It's unclear which way the pun goes. Is Maddie a chess piece compared to a bird? or is she a bird compared to a chess piece? In an officially commissioned fan art, both elements are featured together, like the artists couldn't figure it out and just decided to throw both in. Because Carmilla turns into a panther, everyone wants to imagine that Maddie turns into an animal too, and depending on how one reads the Rook nickname, it's possible that she could turn into a Rook bird. If Maddie is a Rook bird person, it's worth noting that the context makes for a rare case where a black person could be a black corvid without racist connotation. Carmilla is a white woman turning into a panther, defines the vampire power of turning into black animals, regardless of human skin tone. We might question why black animals are seen as especially spooky, but the idea of Maddie being part corvid is divorced from standard racist depictions of black people as crows. Anyway, Maddie's out, Vordenberg's in.
Well, that is just neat.
Oh, hi, Buffy line.
Well, this is just neat.
Vordenberg tosses away his walking stick. He's not a feeble old man. That was a lie. It makes one wonder what else about him is a lie. Maddie tries to kill Laura in anger, but Carmilla saves her again, notably taking Laura by surprise, who tries to hide behind Vordenberg of all people. Yes, Laura, hide behind the one person in the room least likely to fend off a murderous vampire. Maddie gives a parting taunt, inhumanly screeches, and vanishes.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
Now, Laura, it's not nice to make fun of Carmilla in season 1.
Such arms, such shoulders. The primitive by way of the neoclassical.
They have a celebratory dance party, but then Vordenberg shows his true colors.
For my first access rating board chair, I hereby order the immediate detainment of all individuals known or suspected to be vampires.
Oh, crap.
They've turned on us! Treacherous dogs!
After this point, Vordenberg is an overt analog for Hitler, and the vampires are analogs for Jews. After democratically electing Vordenberg to Silas Board chair, like Hitler being elected as Chancellor of Germany, Vordenberg immediately issues an order to have all vampires detained, like Hitler immediately having political opponents sent to Dachau, which was later expanded into the final solution. Though Laura protests, Vordenberg makes a few good points about vampires being dangerous.
Who was it that built this school as a feeding ground? Vampiren. Who was it incited la terror? Vampiren.
Which is a bad thing when he stands for Hitler. This isn't a big lie, it's just accurate. The Holocaust metaphor is a hell of a mess. I don't know if it's because Steph Walkneen appears to be the only Jewish person in the production, but I assume it doesn't help. The plot is written like it should be a Jewish story, but is so incredibly distorted. Like everyone just watched a load of documentaries and Holocaust movies, took a bunch of notes, and then wrote a completely different story based on those notes. It's kind of infuriating how much research clearly went into this, because it was used so badly. Carmilla nails the thematic tension of a Holocaust story, but makes an insensitive choice in the depiction of its monstrous, murderous vampires as equivalent to Jews suffering anti-Semitic oppression and genocide. It isn't an anti-Semitic conspiracy, but it is bad writing. Throughout the wide world of vampire fiction, there are plenty of milquetoast vampires whose temperaments are so mellow that targeting them on the basis of being vampires would be fear-driven bigotry. Bunnicula is just a harmless pet rabbit with gothic aesthetics. Carmilla is not harmless. I think a conservative estimate would place her kill count at over 1,000, and she's the nice one in her family.
5 people every 20 years to keep that monster asleep. More people die from dog bites every year. Hell, more people die from me every year.
The Dean, Maddie, and Will almost certainly have a kill rate far greater than Carmilla's. She starts to go into catatonic shock when kept from consuming blood in 9 days, and she'd probably keep her victims alive as long as possible, as does her novella counterpart. The other vampires don't display the same restraint. They'd probably regularly kill one person a week if left to their own devices, plus a few massacres whenever the mood strikes them. Each vampire carries the kill count equivalent to a war. They are monsters.
You little monster.
This is not remotely comparable to Jews suffering under Nazi Germany. There's no such thing as an inherently bad story idea. It's all in the execution. But the depiction of victimized Jews as murderous vampires must be handled with great care. This is the territory of literal anti-Semitic propaganda. It can probably be subverted if done correctly. However, the Carmilla web series takes it all so lightly and runs headlong into unfortunate implication territory. Vordenberg eyes JP with suspicion, and he quietly sneaks out. Our takeaway is seemingly supposed to be that Vordenberg is a dangerous bigot, but he has a point. JP is a vampire, and he is dangerous. Later on in the season, we'll see him succumb to instincts and attack like a vicious animal with super strength and speed. It is a bad thing when the bigot figure is shown to have a point about what is meant to be taken as his bigotry, especially when the bigotry is code for Hitler's anti-Semitism. This is an atrocious mishandling of a Nazi metaphor. Now, the story of Carmilla can work with Nazis. The 2014 play by David McDowell Blue works by having 4 distinct elements: the Nazis in power, the Camusian tension that comes from that, oppressed marginalized groups, and also vampires. Vampires just happen to exist in the world at the same time as the Nazis, and they have a conflict with the Nazis, but they don't stand for any real-world group. Vampires are allowed to be their own ambiguous element without straying into unfortunate implications. It's a decent handling that Carmilla Season 2 completely fails at. Where it succeeds is with tension. A fascist is in control, and everyone's security is threatened. In theory, Silas thrives on the constant tension of death being around every corner, but it's always framed in a silly tone. Part of the way Carmilla and the other vampires are framed as threats in Season 1 is Laura having the assumption that everyone would otherwise be safe. Once Vordenberg takes over, that assumption drops away, and a terrifying uncertainty settles over the campus.
This guy being the president, it's like there's a horse loose in a hospital.
The first episode of Season 2 was released a few weeks before Donald Trump's first U.S. presidential campaign started up. He made his announcement and pledged to build a border wall a day before the episode went up, depicting Laura trying to get Carmilla to oppose Maddie as the student representative. Trump discourse was underway when Vordenberg came into power. At the time, Trump just seemed like a random racist reality show host turned politician who couldn't possibly win compared to the super competent Hillary Clinton, so he was worth nothing more than a bunch of jokes. When Vordenberg brought fascism to Silas, there was nothing to compare him to other than Hitler, but following Trump's rise to power, the character's fascism takes on new significance as an eerie prediction of what would ultimately happen in the States.
The president, who last month was revealed to be an as yet unidentified species of lizard creature with very small hands.
Aside from just the fact that Trump himself resembles Hitler, Vordenberg evokes Trump in his rambling old man quality.
An economy based on wind. I never understood wind. I know windmills very much. I've studied it better than anybody. I know it's very expensive. They're made in China and Germany mostly. Very few made here, almost none. But they're manufactured tremendous, if you're into this, tremendous fumes, gases are spewing into the atmosphere. We have a world, right?
That was the beginning of my great affair with the Grand Duchess Anastasia. A year and a half of caviar, and vodka, and torrid rumpy-bumpy stein. How about that?
You were supposed to be talking about funding for the repairs.
Also, it was supposed to be a 45-second response.
Oh, well, how long was mine?
The last half hour.
Some of the pervier aspects of his personality, and the debate between him and Maddie, which is eerily similar to the 2016 presidential debates between Trump and Clinton. In both cases, a rambling old man talked over a far more qualified, distinguished female leader. The latter of which could be criticized as an exploitative girl boss, but at least not a half-senile old Nazi. If the Carmilla web series was delayed only a year, you can bet there would be deliberate parallels. Maddie's unsecured letters to Corvée would come into play. They would chant, "Lock her up." Vordenberg would want to build a wall around Silas and make Austria pay for it. And he would definitely say, "Make Silas great again." However, even without a deliberate parallel, the fact that both Vordenberg and Trump resemble Hitler gives the fascist tension a strange relatability that modern people really shouldn't have. It's a Holocaust movie element that we all know well, as exemplified with the horse in the hospital metaphor. Fascism is relevant to our lives, and this wacky vampire show has a strange resonance. Vordenberg immediately gets himself a goon squad, made up of all members of the Greek system, who he supercharges with magical steroids to make them as strong and as fast as vampires. These minions display a symbol on their foreheads, in parallel to Nazi shock troops wearing swastika armbands. Yes, that's Danny wearing the equivalent of a swastika armband. Danny has joined the Fantasy Brown Shirts, who wear brown Letterman jackets. Close enough.
It's just until things get back to normal.
And you really think that's going to be anytime soon?
I think we got this far. We can figure the rest out.
I'm sorry, Danny fans, but she can't be considered a good guy anymore. At best, she's as morally ambiguous as Carmilla. However, due to the horrendous handling of the Nazi metaphor, the fans don't even see her as that. She's framed as a good guy, only misled and a little ignorant, so no one reckons with the severity of a woman embracing fascism and wholeheartedly joining what amounts to the brown shirts. Danny Lawrence, literal fascist. David McDowell Blue has talked about the difficulty of getting people to recognize characters as villains when they seem to be doing heroic things in common narrative patterns, which is why his portrayal of Nazi pedophile General Spielsdorf is sometimes seen as cartoonishly evil. Before he added the pedophile element, people would read him as a good guy, even as a Nazi, just for opposing vampires. That may be part of why Danny fans don't read her as a villain. I also think that her having had an established fan base, rooted in the lighthearted portrayal of Season 1, contributes a lot, especially when Season 2 doesn't adequately frame her as transforming into a darker and more morally ambiguous character. The general difficulty of framing a character as villainous without cartoonish exaggeration intersects with overall problems with the fascist metaphor. The free press is halted. Laura no longer operates SNN and doesn't feel comfortable sharing her vlogs with all of Silas, restricting them to a close friend group. Likewise, the Fantasy Brown Shirts arrest the journalism teacher, resurrected Nellie Bly, for making a statement against Vordenberg's actions. This parallels Hitler outlawing newspapers and radio for non-fascist ideologies, and sending shock troops to arrest journalists of these competing ideologies.
I once again denounce the vicious series of vampire attacks that have targeted those who supported my rise to chairman. My hunters and I shall be relentless in rooting out this and any other threats to the human students of Silas University.
Vordenberg's PA system alludes to the Nazi national newspaper Völkischer Beobachter, the People's Observer. In the background, the Fantasy Brown Shirts hunt for fantasy Jews, the vampires. Perry informs Laura that the vampires are not just evading capture, but are being actively aggressive, sharing a rumor that Carmilla was sighted killing someone. This is later implied to be disinformation to make Carmilla look worse than she is, but it's problematic in the metaphor to imply that an oppressed group fighting back against attempted genocide somehow makes them just as bad as their oppressors. That's how Nazis framed the whole thing, that the concentration camps were necessary to protect the German people from hostile enemies, and Jews fighting back against them was part of that framing. Modern neo-Nazi propaganda has proliferated the disinformation that Jews didn't resist the genocide of the Holocaust, and then they hold this up as like evidence that Jews knew they deserved it. This is a lie. Jews fought back in like 100 different separate occurrences, most prominently the Warsaw Rebellion. The 1943 Warsaw Uprising was a Battle of the Alamo level of armed resistance, with underground bunkers, guns, grenades, and improvised explosives against a superior force, momentarily stunning the Nazis with the strength of their ferocity before they were slaughtered. This was a noble effort of good people against evil people. It's not a sign that the Nazis were right to consider them enemies of the state. Of course, Carmilla and Maddie are bad fits for the Jewish metaphor because they are actually dangerous mass murderers. The fact that it could be framed as a sign of them being evil to fight against Nazi figures points at severe foundational flaws in the plot structure. It portrays Nazi figures like they might be the good guys in the conflict. This aids the moral ambiguity theme by also creating a pro-Nazi theme. This presumably was not the intent, so I believe it's accurate to call this a massive writing mistake. In the effort to have a theme about moral ambiguity, there's a problematic conflation between moral determinism and moral actions. You can absolutely have definite bad guys without having the just world fallacy. One night, Maddie plows her way through the door with an injured Carmilla, shot with an arrow, and demands that Laura help them. Laura still cares about Carmilla and gives her a bag of blood, but puts her foot down when Maddie tells her to summon Laugh to perform surgery. Apparently vampires can suffer organ failure. Weird. Laura stands up to Maddie and insists that she and Carmilla play by her rules, instead of ordering her around like a servant.
Neither of you is going to bite, maim, or kill anyone. At all, for any reason. Because if you do, I will have the Baron's army of steak-happy super minions down here so fast that you'll get whiplash. Understood?
The Jewish metaphor effectively makes Laura a fascist for demanding that Maddie negotiate with her for shelter, and implies that Jewish refugees were at fault. But let's ignore that for a second. In the context of vampire fiction, Laura standing up to Maddie is an impressive feminist moment. True Blood and related vampire fiction has a problem of vampire kink positioning abusive BDSM dynamics against antagonistic vampire hunters. Laura is into Carmilla and can get off on vampire kink, but she doesn't let that make her a doormat. Her standing up to Maddie, a mass murderer she knows wants to kill her, is a profound moment of strength. That is ruined when you remember that basically makes her a fascist, threatening to summon the fantasy brown shirts if the Jewish figure isn't compliant. God, what a stupid metaphor. Throughout the second season, Perry's role is mostly as an angry, traumatized victim. It's noted early on that she was right there when the Dean fell into the Lustig crater. A woman died just in front of her, and we can understand that can be traumatizing. So we understand her escalating emotions when she's the one who discovers the murdered students. Perry's trauma is the driving force. When a flock of crows attacks Perry while reciting a threat in Latin, it seems obvious that Maddie is behind it, fueling speculation that she has a rook-bird transformation, and encouraging Laura to take her down, to avenge the murdered students, and keep Perry safe. Every time Perry is hurt, Laura assumes it's Maddie trying to intimidate them and more aggressively tries to take her down. As Perry was standing close to the Dean when she fell, and Season 1 shows that the Dean could possess Laura, fans started to speculate that the Dean didn't die, just abandoned her body and went into Perry. Reactions to individual episodes started to include the mimetic phrase, "Perry is the Dean," whenever she seemed to make the situation worse.
Could Maddie really have murdered those little journalists? The Summers? Could the Baron have done it? What if something else has been happening all along? Something that started all those nights ago when that wretched little moppet cast me into the pit, and I had to find alternative accommodations.
And they were completely right. The Dean buried herself in Perry's subconscious in the Season 1 finale, which would have been great to see on screen. The Dean was powerless during the Christmas special, but slowly gained enough power to massacre the Voice of Silas students. Why is unclear, but I think the transmedia points to their worship of Lofi, who seems to be the Dean's enemy. They might have tried to release Lofi from the Lustig crater. Once they are dead, she used their murders to manipulate Laura against Maddie and put Vordenberg into power. Note that Perry is the one who comes up with the leverage that Laura uses to get the board to boot out Maddie. It's just easy to forget Perry's involvement when she's so quiet, while Laura and Vordenberg are so flamboyant. In fact, anytime Perry seems to be involved in drama, she's creating discord, and it can be assumed to be the Dean's influence. Perry gets angry at LaFontaine for resurrecting JP in Will's body, which is probably the Dean trying to keep Laugh distracted. Perry leads Laura to persuade Carmilla to go against Maddie, which is probably the dean trying to ruin their relationship. Even the infamous "this is not a game" rant is probably the dean trying to manipulate everyone, but it's still kind of a buzzkill, making the season hard to watch. At one point, Maddie scrutinizes Perry and says that she looks familiar. At the time, it's used as evidence that Maddie saw Perry at the Voice of Silence after massacring the students, but it's recontextualized once we understand that Perry is possessed by the dean. Maddie probably recognized the dean's mannerisms in Perry. Though there is a big reveal at the end of the season, clues are slowly worked in throughout it, and Perry's behavior gets more and more off as the season progresses, until she's literally posing like the scary woman in the painting. I think you're meant to try to guess the twist. While Lev attempts surgery on Carmilla in their madcap style, Perry confronts Maddie, accusing her of being the one who killed the student journalists and of harassing her. I think this is the dean nudging Perry in the direction of thinking these things, that Perry is somewhat in control, but doesn't realize that she has a backseat driver.
You cut me up and you tried to kill me. I never sleep anymore without seeing them, without seeing their dead eyes looking at me.
Probably because the dean has been manipulating her dreams. Maddie denies it, saying that she wasn't in the country at the point of the murder, but Perry is so emotional and right that Maddie is generally a killer that Maddie's denial doesn't hold much weight in the scene. Perry tells Laura she is wrong for harboring fugitive vampires, and Perry is framed as having a decent point when we don't know that it's the dean's manipulation. I don't know how intentional it is, but you could say that it's like a nod to the concept of white tears and how an emotional white woman can have social power against a black woman, and the black woman denies wrongdoing and is framed as like she's probably the villain because she's going up against the emotional white woman.
We need to hide them, now.
What?
The stormtroopers are coming.
Most people probably read that as a reference to Star Wars, which it sort of is, but it's also an overt nod to the Holocaust metaphor. Laura hides the vampires under the floorboards and plays it cool while the fantasy brown shirts investigate. I'm fairly certain Inglourious Bastards was an influence here.
It looked like the end of a Tarantino movie.
Fortunately, a bunch of college kids are no Hans Landa.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
Dude, is there blood on the throw?
Well, that just must have been from when I was pickling beets earlier.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
They're all suspicious, but Danny wants to play favorites with Laura and let them go. Theo objects. They bicker. It comes down to Laura personally promising Danny that she is not harboring Carmilla, turning Holocaust drama into school romance drama. Danny throws her weight around to insist that Laura is trustworthy, even though no one actually believes it. Kirsch vouches for Danny because, well, he's a simp, which annoys Theo, and they all grudgingly go with it.
Be careful. Those aren't kittens under your floorboards.
You knew?
Well, she does now. I wish that was the response, but it turns out that Danny is just observant. That line about kittens makes some people speculate that Maddie also turns into a Black Panther and is just called the Rook as a reference to the chess piece. However, it's probably a tie-in to the transmedia, where Laura, to hide the fact that she's harboring enemies of the state, refers to Carmilla as a rescued alley cat. She first refers to Maddie as the cat's owner, which doesn't make sense with a supposedly feral cat, and later refers to her as another cat. Laura then pretends to be keeping 3 pet cats, which is a humorously flimsy lie when she does things like criticize her cat's tastes in TV and fights over the remote with them. La Fontaine also refers to them as cats. Danny's line here seemingly just dismisses Laura's horrible code, in a rare instance where you must read the transmedia to fully understand the main show. When the Brown Jackets leave, Maddie and Carmilla come out of hiding, and Perry promptly attacks Maddie with holy water. There's a funny bit here that I only noticed in prepping for this review that I'm pretty sure Natasha Negovanla's improvs, where instead of Carmilla just holding Maddie while Perry attacks her, she moves toward Perry and then abruptly backs off while glaring at her, like Perry splashed Carmilla and she's pissed off, but decides to use Maddie as an inhuman shield between her and Perry instead of attacking. Ah, sisters.
You are a poison. Perry, stop it! Reaching into our dreams, our minds, but I am not going to let you.
Here she's cognizant of an evil presence inside of her. She just thinks it's Maddie, not the Dean. Maddie roars and tackles Perry off screen, where we hear noises. Now, this could mean that she turns into a panther, as it's similar to Carmilla turning into a panther in the Christmas special, or she could just be roaring in vampire form.
No killing! You promised!
I love how whiny she sounds. She threatens Laura.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
And Laura barely talks her out of it. Carmilla tries to keep the peace, but Laugh gets pissed at her because Maddie bit Perry, and Laura loses it and tells them all to shut up.
Shut up! It is almost 2 in the morning, and I am so tired.
It's a little obnoxious, but I can see Laura starting to get past her idealism here. Sometimes things are just complicated, and you have to be a little selfish and acknowledge that you're not a perfect hero archetype. In the transmedia, it's explained that Perry is brought to the Silas emergency room with the excuse that one of Laura's pet cats bit her. Either the Silas doctors are extremely naive, or just like, every patient I see is connected to one evil conspiracy or another. Who really cares at this point? Carmilla thanks Laura for letting them stay, and she explains her perspective. She loves Laura in a possessive vampire way, and is largely apathetic to everyone around them. Will only do good guy things to make Laura happy, and she can't change how she feels. So Laura pushing this narrative that Carmilla can't relate to makes them incompatible. Laura acknowledges this, but indicates that the ideals of heroism are basically her religion, and she can't change either. The breakup makes sense, but it's sad.
Do you miss me?
Like someone cut a hole in me.
The thing that triggered their breakup was Dean Perry getting Laura to ask Carmilla to betray Maddie, who she has feelings for of some sort. However, now, Carmilla has seen Maddie actually threaten Laura's life. Because Carmilla does care about Laura and is concerned about her well-being, she betrays Maddie for Laura, a sign of her undying love, and shares her greatest weakness. Maddie is a lich, an undead sorcerer who can't be killed by normal means because her life source has been moved out of her body and into, in the interest of avoiding anti-Semitism, let's call it a Horcrux. Maddie's Horcrux is in her locket. If worst comes to worst, Laura can destroy the locket to kill Maddie. It's a beautiful gesture that Laura promptly betrays to tell Danny because that's what heroes do. Her idealism gets in the way of actual loyalty. Meanwhile, Wardenberg restricts Silas to human students who, it's implied, have to prove their pure bloodlines. An obvious parallel to Nazi racism. Conscripts the Styrian village mob to buff out his security forces. Arrests half of the alchemy club. Replaces the professors with former members of the East German secret police. And makes the student body study military tactics from several centuries ago. It's all very fashy, though I still don't like the metaphor because the monsters he targets are dangerous and not an adequate stand-in for victims of Nazi oppression. At least there is a sense of escalation on the order of first they came for. There are various definitions of fascism floating around, but I like Gord Hill's 8 main traits of a fascist regime. Except for number 5, anti-Semitism, Wardenberg's regime hits every beat. It's a dictatorship, has a paramilitary force, is inherently racist, has an imperialist worldview, internal opposition is violently oppressed, educational and cultural institutions are replaced with fascist indoctrination, and all of these are used to elevate the dictator in a cult. Even the anti-Semitism element can't be argued as translated into the opposition of occultist, read Kabbalist, domination as expressed with the Corvée Corporation, and similar elements. Wardenberg isn't just a Hitler figure, he's a literal fascist dictator in the context of the story. Danny, Kirsch, Mel, and Theo are literal fascists for embracing this fascist state. After seeing the extent of Wardenberg's authoritarianism, Danny apologizes to Laura for being a fascist. She doesn't say fascist, but that's what she means. Okay, I'd accept that as a sign of moral growth if it were properly explored, but Laura is so caught up in her narrative thinking that she praises Danny for doing what she thought was the right thing, and shares how to kill Maddie because they're heroes opposing bad guys. Both of these characters are majorly flawed, and I don't think that most of the audience understands that. In a sense, they have become the figure of General Spielsdorf from the secondary reading of the novella that has him as an oppressive force. Forget Lofi, they're the demons of the light. It's beautifully morally complex, but I think the extent of the complexities are lost on most of the audience, who just want to see Laura be happy and kiss girls. Speaking of Lofi, Vordenberg goes to war against the fish. The activists are detained for unlawful assembly, and being pulled away from their goddess literally kills them. One makes an ominous warning about the 7 gates. Laugh makes noise about trying to rescue these brainwashed minions, but as far as I can tell, they don't, so Vordenberg kills them through Lofi deprivation. Dark. He then assembles a giant burning glass, a series of magnifying lenses to concentrate solar energy, to burn Lofi to death. This is an old-timey theoretical weapon that Archimedes supposedly used to repel Roman invaders, as seen in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. But it's worth note that the Nazis also designed, but never implemented, a similar weapon that would use a mirror on a satellite. This burning glass could be the Nazi weapon translated into the Silas old-timey warfare theme.
They're gonna kill Moby's dick!
The Scoobies decide to stop Vordenberg out of fear that trying to kill Lofi would cause some huge disaster. Either Lofi escaping or her death throes killing everyone. While tensely waiting for the moment to enact the plan to sabotage the burning glass, Laura and Carmilla play Senet, an ancient Egyptian board game the Dean has on hand about the soul traveling through the underworld. Put a pin in that for season 3. The two of them get emotional and kiss, but Laura stresses that she won't change, and says that she'll demand Carmilla change, which means they still can't get back together. They go on the mission. In their absence, Dean Perry tries to manipulate us, Laura's viewers, which is kind of an amazing meta-dynamic. However, Maddie interrupts her. The broadcast is interrupted and comes back on in the morning when the Scoobies return. Danny was a no-show and they aborted. Dean Perry is gone, and Maddie is covered in blood and acts like she's high on whatever blood she drank. We can imagine that she either drank from Lofi and got high from God blood, or drank from Dean Perry and got high on Dean blood. It doesn't look good, and we can see Carmilla really start to turn on Maddie here, and see the importance of human life, when Maddie doesn't seem to care if she ate Perry or drank some of Lofi's blood in hopes of gaining superpowers. Carmilla has grown past the transmedia characterization where she only refrained from eating Perry to make Laura happy. Her time with the Scoobies has made her appreciate Perry as a person and not just a potential pet or blood bag, and is truly changing as Laura wants, and not just because Laura wants it. Laura doesn't notice because she's focused on Maddie. It turns out that though the broadcast got cut, the camera still recorded a bit, so they checked the footage. Maddie confronted Dean Perry, who played the innocent victim, up to a point, and then gave a death prophecy about how
the first gate wants strength, wants the rook.
What?
The first gate wants the rook.
Which terrified Maddie, and then the recording magically stopped. Maddie indicates that they're all in danger, that the end of the world is coming. But before she can get to the point, Vordenberg interrupts. Something that gets forgotten in all of the body-stealing hijinks is that the Dean is vampiric. She drinks blood even if she doesn't always have a vampire form. She drinks blood in Laura's body, and now that she's in Perry's body, she drinks blood and frames Maddie for massacring the Summer Society, killing almost everyone except Danny and Mel, and a handful of others, and drinking their blood like a super powerful vampire. Either she just naturally has super strength, or supercharges herself by drinking Lofi's blood. Danny finds the bodies, and having been primed by Dean Perry, betrays Maddie and Carmilla to make a deal with Vordenberg. He promises to reverse his fascist takeover and let Silas be free in exchange for their lives. Because everything about him has indicated he tells the truth, right? And here's probably my favorite Vordenberg line.
We can't have vampires running around murdering students. This isn't the Balkans, after all.
What? What are you talking about? The Balkans? Maddie calls him on his lies, and he admits it.
Yes. Perhaps I do embroider from time to time. Or sometimes the truth is insufficient to the needs of one's soul. Life is full of humdrum humiliations, battles lost, lovers who disappoint. Why not imagine it better? Why not tell a story? If it helps you believe that just beyond the horizon, there might be some great adventure, some chance to be the man you've always wanted to be Baron Vordenberg, vampire hunter, chair of the board of Silas University, God Slayer.
And here we have the dark side of Laura's idealism. It's not real. It's just a lie. She's not a good guy. Maddie's not a bad guy. Because the world isn't that black and white. Pretending it is that simple makes the supposed good guys do horrible things. Fascist things. Laura starts to become aware of this, while Vordenberg is committed to lying to himself and being the good guy, which means being the fascist, and he will continue the struggle to its inevitable conclusion. He orders the burning glass be activated, and Lofi speaks through Laugh and Kirsch to Rage and share the important detail that she's there to guard the first gate. If she dies, there's nothing to stop the first gate from being opened, and they'll all die. And then Vordenberg successfully kills Lofi, knocking out the possessed students.
Can we sell it as canned tuna, do you think?
And he announces his intent to execute Maddie. She reveals that she now remembers drinking Lofi's blood, making her strong enough to kill Vordenberg, and, to be fair, threatens to murder all of Austria.
I'm gonna drink this nation dry. I am death on dark wings. You want to blame me for carnage?
Moves to kill him, and Danny protects him. She's strong enough to annoy Maddie, who starts to break her arm, and Ms. Gestapo here retaliates by grabbing Maddie's locket and grinding it under her feet. There's then a flash sideways to another timeline without the dean, where everyone gets along. Maddie never tried to sell anyone, Laura never deposed her, and everyone just enjoys each other's company. Laura respects Maddie. Laura and Carmilla are still together. Carmilla and Maddie play like giddy children while musing on existentialist philosophy, and Carmilla reveals that Vordenberg's ancestor raped her. Her violence towards his family was vicious, but it adds nuance that makes her sympathetic and more than just a monster. Vordenberg's simplistic storytelling behavior is deeply flawed, and it's not something that Laura should relate to. Okay, so the web series never makes it explicit, but I think we're supposed to take away that Vordenberg is the man who raped Carmilla, not some distant ancestor. Keep in mind that everything Vordenberg says must be taken with a grain of salt, including the way he presents himself. He doesn't really need a cane. Maybe the idea of him coming from a long line of similar people is also a lie. His story about Carmilla massacring his ancestor's family and leaving him to die.
The Countess was promised to my great-great-grandfather, and he loved her. So that when she became a monster, he hid her and protected her. And she repaid him by killing all of his family and all those that he loved, leaving him to die, alone and dishonored.
Mostly only makes sense if he's that guy. His introduction has him tell Laura that she reminds him of someone he had a great love affair with, before seeking immortality that turned out to be a bust.
I knew a young lady very like you once. A great love affair. Ended. Before my voyage to the Hesperides for the golden apples of immortality. Turned out to be oranges, you know, so no immortality, but lovely juice.
Maybe he's not lying about the whole thing, just parts. Maybe he means he was romantically obsessed with Carmilla, lies about it being consensual on her part, and lies about his effort to become immortal being a failure. And he lies about being in the Prussian cavalry, which indicates he's at least 160 years old, possibly more like 200 years, to care about the cavalry's use in the Napoleonic Wars. Maybe he's as old as Carmilla, 335 years old, just showing age because he became immortal in a different way, eating the golden apples of the Hesperides, I think that's how it's pronounced, instead of becoming a vampire. I think we're supposed to figure this out from the clues we're given, and possibly there would be a reveal in Season 3 that was dropped with a change in tone. That makes Laura's journey to defeat her inner Vordenberg deeply meaningful to her relationship with Carmilla. Back in the main timeline, Carmilla rages.
I am going to hunt, torture, and kill you. And it won't be satisfying if it ends too quickly, so you need to run.
Lashing out at Danny and Laura for betraying her. Man, I love the pathos here. Such delicious angst. Carmilla starts to attack Danny, and then Laura, which follows the pattern of revenge from her rape. But she can't bring herself to do it. She still cares about Laura, and just runs into the night to take her chances alone, leaving them with a threat to kill them if they go after her. Oh, the angst! Fangirls hate this scene. I love the pathos. I think it's worth note that Maddie's dying words are concentrated on Carmilla's well-being, warning her that the Dean is behind everything and must have some ally out there trying to complete her plans. Maddie doesn't blame Carmilla, Laura, or Danny for her death. She looks at the general, not the subordinates. In that sense, Maddie is actually more ethical than Carmilla. Vordenberg also ran off, like a coward, and he gathers his forces to lead a siege on the Dean's place. Dean Perry shows up, fine, obviously, and leads the Scoobies to prepare for the siege. Danny tries to get Laura to stop blaming herself, and Dean Perry blocks this effort. No one can be thinking clearly, see. Laura finally realizes that she's wrong for believing she's the good guy, because the world is complicated, and she shouldn't try to make Carmilla change when Laura herself has been doing bad things in the name of righteousness. They then fight off an off-screen siege because they didn't have the budget to depict a battle. We just hear sound effects. It sounds like Danny's sword fights? I get that they didn't have the budget for a full Helm's Deep scene, but it really is annoying to not have anything on screen.
Silas University, welcome to La Résistance!
Oh, hi, reference to fighting Nazis. During a pause, Laura catches sight of Dean Perry sneaking off with some ominous literature. Dean Perry distracts her with a Carmilla sighting, apparently Carmilla trying to supercharge on Luffy blood, but because the Dean can't be trusted, it might actually be Carmilla trying to weaken the forces threatening to kill Laura. The Dean says that she sees Carmilla headed for the Lustig crater, but we only know for sure that she kills a lot of Vordenberg's people and then retreats. The transmedia indicates that she tries to kill Vordenberg himself, but he cowardly hides behind his subordinates, and she can't reach him.
Fetch me my blunderbuss. If I shot the last saber-toothed tiger, I can damn well shoot her.
Dean Perry manipulates Laugh into giving Laura the idea to kill Vordenberg, the way that Maddie was planning to when she gathered piles on the other board members' weaknesses. They figure out that Vordenberg's power comes from the board charter. If they destroy that, it seems like he'd die like Maddie did when her Horcrux was destroyed. Theo and Mill contact them to ask for their help in saving detained students, saying that they care more about the students' well-being than Vordenberg's crusade to kill vampires. And the Scoobies accept, while Dean Perry looks absolutely terrifying in the background. Meanwhile, the transmedia compares Laura to the vampires in her hunger. There's a brief clip in the show where she lunges on some apples that Danny brings her, in parallel with the way vampires lunge on people to bite them. However, apples are not sentient beings, so it's less of a shared character trait and more of a contrast that she doesn't prey on anything that wouldn't want to be eaten. But on her Twitter account, she shares how the siege cuts off supplies and food must be rationed. She gets hungrier and hungrier, and she starts joking about cannibalizing her friends. In a state of desperation, she's not that different from a starving vampire herself. She is now in parallel with transmedia Carmilla when she was eyeing Laugh and Perry as potential meals, while Carmilla has expanded her ethical framework to understand the problem with following through on such impulses. Laura sends Carmilla a message on open broadcast to the whole campus to ask for her help in fighting Vordenberg, which she was doing anyway, and apologizes, finally showing some character growth and admitting that her idealism is wrong. Thinking she's the good guy fighting a great crusade makes her the same as Vordenberg. Having seen his mess, she wants to be different. She wants to change into a better version of herself. Twist! She was the monster who needed to change the whole time. She couldn't change for Carmilla. She had to understand for herself why changing was a good idea. Her new philosophy is that suffering people should be helped. Not to play the role of being a good person, but because the only thing that matters in a terrifying world is people helping each other. Or, as Camus put it, I recognize only one duty, and that is to love. Vordenberg is hurting people, so he must be stopped. Laura now asks Carmilla to help her, because working together to help suffering people is what anyone should do. Carmilla joins the broadcast to talk, having somehow gotten into the library. It's implied that the library, a sentient entity, found her. She basically says that Laura hasn't changed because she's still playing hero, and is now asking Carmilla for help without giving her anything different. Laura makes another reference to them being characters in a story, not having fully dropped that idea, and Carmilla points out the hypocrisy and asserts a fascist point about the strong dominating the weak, before dramatically hanging up. Dean Perry gets Laura to leave, before Carmilla calls back to grudgingly agree to help. However, Dean Perry coldly tells her that Laura doesn't want her help. There's an epic fight scene off screen, after which Laura brings back a wounded Kirsch, who got stabbed by a Styrian villager with a pitchfork. Kind of like Giles, who gets stabbed by a knight of Byzantium with a lance. Dani stands in the doorway, and then gets blood purged when Theo stabs her in the back. So Nazis are inherently unstable. They work together, but kind of hate each other. Shortly after Hitler took power, the Nazis had less need to work together and started to form different factions. Puritanical corporatists, anti-Semitic communists, and the brown shirts, gay thugs. Hitler saw the tide starting to turn and consolidated his power by standing with the corporatists and killing off the other factions in what's called the Night of the Long Knives or the Blood Purge. It's reasonable enough to depict this betrayal in a Nazi metaphor, but it's so garbled that the guy who I think is supposed to be Ernst Röhm kills someone like Hitler's men killed Ernst Röhm, and he does so with a stab to the back, like the Nazis accused Jews of doing. No one actually stabbed anyone in the back. That was just an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Hitler's big lie. To actually depict, in their little Holocaust metaphor, someone stabbing someone else in the back is super problematic, unless you can back it up with good writing. And no, you don't. Dani dying in Laura's arms, though. Ooh, that is wonderful pathos. Teenage fangirls hated this part. For many, it felt like an actual friend dying. I'm sympathetic, but I think we need to appreciate sad moments like this the way we can appreciate parental death in kids' movies. It helps us grow to feel such intense emotion and ultimately be safe. Also, Dani was a fascist. Just saying. Mel comes in, sees what Theo did, and pledges to honor Dani's memory. Laura asks Mel to surrender, and she agrees. Vordenberg celebrates by bringing a captured Carmilla to execute in front of Laura. However, Dean Perry gives Laura the Silas Charter and tells her to kill him. Vordenberg begs for his life, saying that they're the same, they have the same idealism, and heroes don't kill people. Laura thinks about the value of Carmilla's life and kills him.
Oh, schnick-schnack.
Corvée goons, working for the Dean, attack Styrian villagers, and Laura, Laugh, and Carmilla escape in the chaos. Everything else is uncertain. The three of them hide in the library, seeking refuge in its Lovecraftian architecture. Laugh sets up an internet connection so Laura can still make videos, and tries to learn about their new hideout, leaving Laura and Carmilla some time to talk. Laura explains that she killed a man to save Carmilla, that she sacrificed her idealism entirely, and only cared about saving Carmilla. Carmilla sees that Laura truly has changed, and they hug. Carmilla gives her a pep talk about how trying to do the right thing is still a good idea, and that Laura shouldn't change and become apathetic like Carmilla was at the beginning of the season, showing Laura that Carmilla herself has also changed. It's a beautiful love story in a scary world. Things are better between them, but they aren't totally mended. They touch, but they don't kiss yet. That will come later, after they have time to repair their bonds. Thinking about it, Laura realizes that the Dean ultimately got everything she wanted.
If the Dean weren't, dead, it'd be her party. But she is, though. Dead. I mean, totally very dropped a boulder on her Disney villain dead, right? Right?
Roll credits. In the end scene, Dean Perry makes an entry in Laura's vlog, revealing that she is the Dean. She leads Kirsch to recover Dani's body and says a spell in Sumerian that comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, spoken by the goddess Inanna. I will let the dead go up to eat the living. And Dani rises, lustful and sexually dominant. She sees Kirsch and immediately starts making out with him, and then bites him. Yes, Dani's a vampire, and is delightfully wicked. Danny is a morally gray character, now given free rein to embrace her darker shades, as she joins the dean in taking over the campus.
So get some rest, Silas University, because it's gonna be one hell of a summer.
The standard music ending an episode comes out disjointed this time, reflecting the way the world has gone very wrong. Also, Maddie wakes up from non-existence in a mysterious, shadowy place. To be continued.
No way for you to hide from the demon of the